So hi everyone and welcome to another episode of Riskologists. I'm your host Andy Haslam and today I'm delighted to be joined by Jason Dardis. So Jason, welcome to Riskologists.
Hi Andy, thanks for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. It's a pleasure. So we kind of always start off this with a little bit of a question that we pose to everybody, and that's how's your podcast game? Have you done anything like this before? Do you listen to them at all?
I have done a project management podcast before. It was about 3 years ago, pre-COVID, but that's my only experience of partaking in one. My podcast listening game is probably average at best. I'd squeeze one in on my commute every now and again. If I need,
does.
Yes, yeah. If there's a topic I need to get up to speed on, for example, I'll throw on a podcast and see what's there. The last one I listened to was about ground-mounted solar farms.
Oh wow!
So yeah, really
interesting stuff. Yeah, interesting stuff. As always, we like to kick things off with a bit of a journey to date. So, how you started in your career, where it's taken you, and a bit of a timeline up to this very point, recording the podcast today. So, fire away.
I suppose right back to the very start. I grew up working on building sites, so I think it was inevitable that I was going to end up in the industry. So all of my weekends, midterm breaks, summer holidays were all working on building sites. So I got into carpentry and painting predominantly. So when I went to college, I studied construction technology and then moved into architectural technology, and I worked in an architectural practice for about the first 4 years roughly of my working career. Then moved to Dublin Airport to DAA, and I've been there ever since. And the airport's been relatively good to me. I've been good enough to be able to progress up through the ranks, and my current role is program director for one of the key programs in Dublin Airport. So we manage and oversee the implementation of the capital investment program there. Anything from building extensions, retail fit outs, and more recently into sort of baggage systems and passenger security screening systems. So that keeps us fairly busy.
Yeah, it's covering a huge amount of things at the airport. Then it's a wealth of experience. Before we get stuck into the topic a little more detail, as after all, this is a risk management podcast, just briefly, what has your experience been with risk management over your career, and what sort of relationship have you had with it? It's
fair to say I wasn't a huge engager in risk management in the earlier part of my career. It's certainly been an evolution of appreciation for the risk management process, I suppose. But happy to say that I'm now turned the corner. I'm fully on board, and I can certainly see the value in everything that the risk management process brings, and it plays such a vital role in all of our projects now.
Oh, that's great to hear. It's always good to get a bit of a positive response to it, that's for sure. As everyone can already tell from the title of the topic today, we're going to be discussing effective facilitation. So we'll get into this in a little bit more detail shortly. But from your perspective, why did you choose this topic in particular to get stuck into today?
For me, effective facilitation really bridges the gap between non-project professionals involved in projects, so project managers, architects, engineers, and the risk management process. A good facilitator can really join the two together. I've experienced the data input facilitators, the risk preacher, the obstructive guys who are, that's not a risk, that's a consequence type of thing. But I've also experienced the very, very good and the proactive encouraging sessions where everyone feels like they can contribute, regardless of their level of risk management. They may just have an issue, and they need to have that fielded, and they need to have that, I suppose, tweaked and put into the risk model. So a good facilitator can really turn the corner and make risk management much more valuable for a project. The outputs from a well-facilitated workshop can really bring value to the project. And it's not just about the facilitation from, I suppose, a risk modeling perspective. It's about the psychology of it as well. So it might be 50% data capture, 50% psychology, controlling the room, working everybody, and making sure they get the most out of everyone.
It's really interesting you mentioned that, Jason. I mean, it's, from our perspective, you'll probably find that you'll probably find from most risk professionals that psychology is just is just as, if not more important than the knowledge of the theory. We always kind of come back to the old adage, garbage in, garbage out. It isn't just a case of, taking information at face value. It's so important to kind of scrutinize it and dig a bit deeper and really understand the why. Could there be any biases and heuristics at play? Am I being told what I or the others in the room want to hear? Is there a bit of an echo chamber with the people in the room? So there's always loads to consider. But from your perspective, what do you feel makes a good facilitator? How do we get the best out of the team and the session?
For me, that the best facilitators have an almost natural ability to turn a poorly articulated issue from someone in the project team, whether it be a stakeholder or project manager, whoever it is, really dive deeper, understand that issue and shape it into something that's an effective input for a risk model. I'm the worst culprit of this. I'll just blurt out, we've got a problem. And a really good risk facilitator can just turn that into something that works with the model and can really plug it in. I suppose the next thing would be the ability to control the room and really collate all the information that's been fed through the room, because if you're in a session that's got 20, 30 people in it, it's really hard to control that room. It's really hard to take the valuable inputs and turn them into something useful. And they really need to encourage people to contribute to the process.
Yeah, it's another interesting point. I mean, engagement is key, isn't it? And as you've mentioned, a good facilitator encourages and gets the best out from the people within the room. From the perspective of someone who, from your own admission, maybe wasn't one of the biggest fans of risk to start with, what's been the best route to tackle this for you? What's worked for you?
I think where the facilitator can provide an open setting, allow people to freely engage without judging them. I think the worst thing a facilitator can do is assume that everyone in the room is a risk manager or knows the risk management process. It can tend to isolate people and sort of discourage them from engaging in the process. And I think a good risk manager can really take the issue that's been raised, understand it, churn it back out and give an idea of what impact that's going to have on whether it be the schedule model or the cost model that's outputting from the risk model. So they can really steer the conversation.
What kind of facilitation techniques have really worked best for you over the years then, from that, to get the best out of the people in the room, which you find to be the most useful when, whether you're identifying or assessing risks? And as a second kind of part to that question, have you come across any unique or creative ways of driving that engagement with people?
I'll take the second part first. Okay. Jelly beans are the key to risk management.
Oh, you heard it here first, everybody. Jelly beans are the way.
Yeah, world exclusive. Yeah. I remember arriving late to a risk workshop, and when I walked in, the room was absolutely buzzing. There were 20 people in there, everybody, full team, project managers, design managers, stakeholders, consultants. There were Post-its everywhere. Everyone was bouncing ideas off each other. I had never seen a risk workshop like it. And it turns out that the facilitator, Danielle, had given everyone jelly beans at the start of the meeting while the PM talked through all of the details. It was something so simple, but it just diffused the whole situation and the whole formality of it. And it allowed people to let their guard down and engage a little bit. So I approached Danielle during the session just to say, well done. This is a brilliant session. You're going to get some really good outputs out of this. She took me aside and said, actually, I've kept you some jelly beans as well. I thought, yes, this risk management business is not so bad after all.
Exactly. Oh, I think everyone's going to be expecting jelly beans now from that. So I think it's setting the bar quite high, I think, for all the rest of us now. I think there's been a bit of a change, obviously, over the last few years, mainly with COVID coming in. There's been this shift in how people are facilitating these meetings. They're going to more of a web-based meeting platforms. And as you can see, we're already having a meeting on Zoom here. We're not face-to-face. Geography plays a big part of it as well. But do you think that's affected getting the best out of people? Do virtual meetings suffice? Would you always kind of try and endeavor to have them face to face if obviously things like geography allow?
Yeah, I think there's a place for virtual meetings. They're efficient. They can pull together teams from all over the world. They're particularly good for a quick update session. But I would say For the base build of the risk register, your first workshop or your first number of workshops, I think you probably get more out of it in person if you have an in-person session, whether it be done by Post-its, whiteboards, Excel, whatever media the particular facilitator is using. But I think you certainly get more out of the building of the risk register with an in-person session. It's so easy for people to just turn off their cameras, turn off their mics, and start working away on something different while sort of video calls are working in the background.
Yeah. So, have you kind of had any experience with that? I take it, it must be a common thing with it. Have you found any ways of actually trying to tackle that on those web-based meetings?
Yeah, it has happened, certainly. And I have to hold my hands up. I've done it. So, this is not pointing the finger at anybody. Yeah. So I've been the one that's doing it as well. If I'm running a meeting, I tend to ask people to turn on their cameras. Obviously, there's a cohort of people aren't comfortable to do that, which is fine. But as long as they can give their commitment to the meeting and they engage, that's fine.
That's good. Can't ask much more, I suppose, from one of those type of meetings.
Yeah.
So moving on a little bit, we love talking to those people who used to have somewhat a bit of a disdain for the discipline, for risk management, but are now a convert to it. They have these potentially like epiphanal moments or things that have really kind of opened their eyes to how the benefit can be brought from the risk management process. Have you had any of those kind of moments? If you can talk us through maybe how that has happened. Was it a result of any of good facilitation that changed your mind, or was it something else really that did that?
I'm not sure if I'd call it an epiphany moment. It's probably more of an evolution of my appreciation of risk management. But I could certainly pick out two key moments to help me turn the corner. The first one I mentioned was the jelly beans. Brilliant. Just so simple. And it doesn't have to be about jelly beans.
Yeah.
But a mechanism for defusing the meeting and deformalizing it, so everyone can drop their guard and get properly engaged in the process. And the second one is more of a recent one. It's tailoring of the risk model. And what I mean by that is different organizations have different ways of managing their risk, different ways of managing their change management process. So on some of our more recent projects, we really tweaked that and tailored the model to suit the project and our own internal processes. So that made such a huge difference. And all of a sudden you can start to see value.
That's really interesting. So, what was it about the tailoring of the risk model that actually really helped you?
So I suppose we had a fairly significant value project, and it was a brutally complex project, to be honest. It was a baggage project. So about 80% of the scope was already contracted, and we had a remaining 20% that needed some of the original contracted work completed before we could make a decision on how we wanted to proceed with it and how we wanted to handle it. So we tailored the QRA and the overall risk model through a fairly robust series of facilitation meetings. We ring-fenced pots of funds into procurement budgets, contingencies, risk allowances, schedule allowances, and it really gave us a good opportunity to manage that through our change management process and through our own internal governance process. This gave our project sponsors a real sense that the project was being well managed. We were in total control of it, even though we had 20% of the project that wasn't even let yet. And we didn't know exactly how it was going to be let. So it really gave that confidence that the project team were in control of it, and the decisions that were made at change board were final. That allowed the project to move forward at a bit more pace than it had been doing. So it really, really helped us. And I suppose during that same process, it's important to mention that risk management shouldn't happen at the start of a project and sit on a shelf. You really need to work on it through the whole project, update everything, constant monitoring, revisiting the risks. And on that particular project, we were able to apply a sort of a risk burn down, I think is what you call it.
Yeah.
And ultimately we started releasing some of the funding that had been held in contingency back to our sponsors, and they were able to do other things with it. Yeah. So as risks were passed, or as risk likelihood was significantly reduced, we made a call to start releasing some of that contingency back in for other things. So
there's always things that sponsors like to see coming back, I think, that way, isn't it? It's get it out of the contingency and pass it on to something else, like you say.
Yeah.
Obviously, talking about facilitation and everything within the topic of it today, have you found any kind of noticeable differences in the quality of the outputs then from things like the QRA when you've been unfortunately subject to kind of poorer facilitated sessions as opposed to the really well facilitated ones with the jelly beans and so on? And if so, what kind of differences have you noticed in those outputs from those kind of sessions?
Yeah, I suppose on those outputs, the poorly facilitated ones don't tend to bring a whole pile of value to the project. They're the ones that tend to go on the project file or on a shelf, and they're never really used, never referred to, and they're not bringing value to the project manager or the architect, the engineer, whoever's running the project. On the contrary to that, a well facilitated and well presented risk output can bring real value to the project team. It can almost guide their day-to-day activities. And allow them to work in a much more efficient way rather than coming in the morning. What am I going to focus on today? Well, this is happening. And you might get caught up in meetings and never actually progress some of the issues on the project. So if you've got a really concise risk management model, really can drive the project manager's performance. They're focusing on removing the boulders off the track. They're working on those risks constantly.
No, that is really interesting, Jason. But I was looking at obviously the negative ones, or the ones where the sessions haven't been so great, and the poorer the outputs are the ones that get shelved away. Obviously they're not bringing any kind of value to the process and to the projects. How do you think those ones could have actually been improved then?
Jelly beans.
Yeah, jelly beans is the theme. I think we might change the topic to jelly beans.
How could they have been improved? I think with a more robust engagement at the very outset. From the whole team, from the stakeholders, from the contractors, from consultants, whoever's feeding into the register at the particular point in the project. And to do this, the facilitator really needs to create an environment where people aren't afraid to contribute. They're not going to feel silly raising what in their head is a perfectly legitimate issue, and it may be shot down. So we really need to open up those workshops to allow people to speak their mind.
Yeah, I think it's a recurrent theme that we've had from a number of other guests that we've had on the podcast, and everybody's listened to the episodes will have seen this pop up before, that there's never really a silly question. And I think if you've got a question in your head where you think, oh, I don't know whether I should be asking this, nobody else seems to have asked the question as well, you could almost guarantee that out of a room of 20 people, there's probably at least 2 or 3 others who are thinking the same thing and not actually wanting to come across with those questions. So have you ever kind of found any ways yourself really in terms of trying to drag that out of people, as facilitating yourself? Is there any other little tricks or tips and things that have really helped you to get that out of those people?
It's a tricky one. It's really hard to encourage people, and you may have nervous people in the room. You may have people who are new to the organization, but I think the best thing we can collectively do as project professionals is just create that environment and make it comfortable for people to speak their mind. And as you say, there's no such thing as a stupid question. There's no such thing as a bad issue either. So create that environment, make it comfortable for everybody, and let them speak their mind, and don't shoot them down when they do raise an issue.
Yeah, I think that's a really valid one at the end of it, is if you're actually doing the facilitation and you're heading it all, try not to shoot them down for actually coming out with it, and that helps in the encouragement, I'm sure. We've touched on a little bit on QRA, quantitative risk analysis. Where have you really found the most benefit from really well executed QRAs?
Yeah, I suppose as I alluded to earlier, that the real value for me in a QRA is one that will work with an organization's change management process, and it has to work hand in glove with the cost and the schedule as well. So you really get an overall project picture. And if you've got that project picture, it allows the PM to really focus on the key issues. It's an employer's responsibility, and we operate as client representatives, employers representatives, let's call it. And it's the employer's responsibility to make sure that there's sufficient funding available in the budget to execute the project. And that needs to take account of any risks that might materialize during the course of the project. Contractors could find unforeseen issues on a particular site, we need to, as the project's representative and the client's representative, make sure that there's enough money to cover that, be able to keep the project moving, and make sure that the contractor's liability are all covered. And a good risk management process, a robustly constructed QRA, gives us that confidence and gives us the ability to keep the project moving when these things crop up. And we always make sure that we're not going to run out of budget before the end of the project. So it's really, really important.
Yeah, it's definitely one thing you don't want to be running out of. It's the budget and the time, I suppose. Yeah. I mean, let's start to kind of wrap things up a little bit with this. You know, what would your advice be to any risk professional listening to this, particularly at the start of their career, who is maybe struggling with engagement or getting the most out of their project teams?
I'd always encourage risk managers not to get frustrated, particularly with non-risk professionals in the room. Everybody has a valid voice, and a good risk professional can really help those individuals who maybe can't properly articulate an issue into a risk, that they can really help articulate those issues so it fits into the input criteria on whatever system is being used by the risk manager. So a good facilitator will help these individuals tease out their concerns, get some meaningful inputs, and really bring value. So I suppose that's what I would pass on. If anyone is listening, don't get frustrated with people like me who are not risk professionals.
No, it's another amazing, great bit of advice there, Jason. So thank you very much for that. Regular listeners will know that at the end of the podcast, we always ask our guests the same question. And that one is, if you could give yourself one bit of advice at the start of your career that you've maybe picked up along the way, what would it be?
I think it would definitely be one size does not fit all. The same process doesn't work on every project, and don't just tick the box because that's the process that's been used before. Really tailor your risk management strategy to your project and make it work for you. Risk management can be flexible. Talk to your risk manager about how to tailor your strategy so it can work for your project, and set the appropriate level of detail, and don't let risk become a burden. And I think that was the biggest thing. Looking back at myself, I saw risk management as a burden, and it was this thing that you had to do every week or every couple of weeks or every month or whatever it was, and it just took away from time where you could be solving the issues rather than putting them into an Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah. So
I would go back and try and say, one size doesn't fit all. It's not a burden. Use it to your value.
Well, that's another great bit of advice, and I think a lot of people could really do with taking that on board as well. There is always that thing of it's just a tick box exercise. It's we're just here to go through the motions of doing the risk process and not really getting the best from it. And having that thought that one size doesn't fit all, it can be tailored to make it work for you. I think is a great bit of advice there. So appreciate that, Jason. Thanks very much. So that brings us really towards the end of the podcast, and it just leaves me to thank you very much again, Jason, for your time and for your valuable insight today. So if any of our listeners would like to contact you regarding the episode or anything we've mentioned within it, how is it best for them to get in contact with you?
My LinkedIn page is up to date, so probably best to start there.
So just for anyone listening, that's Jason Dardis. So yeah, have a look on there and check him out, and obviously contact him if you need anything, or contact us as well if there's anything that's been brought up in the podcast that you'd like to discuss any further with. But again, thanks very much, Jason. It's been a blast. So thanks very much.
Absolutely. I was really delighted to come on board. So thanks for having me, Andy.
Oh, it's been great to have you. Thanks very much. And everybody, stay tuned for another episode soon.
Thank you.